us again.
Thank you and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before I go on to my presentation, just a couple of words on the work that my organization has done in the Maldives. We basically work on two main issues. One is right to information law. So we were closely involved in the drafting of the drafting and then the consultations that followed the Right to Information Act that was passed last year in Maldives. And on policing, we've done a lot of research on policing standards, as well as some of the new mechanisms that the 2008 Constitution put down. So we've been doing mainly research and a little bit of capacity building. So most of our reports and writings are of course available on our website if anybody is interested. And I'm happy to share more details. The previous speakers have really elaborated a lot on the current situation and the main problems that are there, so I don't want to repeat any of that. But what I want to do is just spell out a couple of problems with the reform process actually, that now with the advantage of hindsight one can lay down a bit more clearly. Because the 2008 Constitution, as was pointed out, was fairly robust, was at par with the international standards, and yet you see a gap, you see a huge democracy deficit on the ground today. So why is that happening? What were the issues with the reforms, particularly in the judiciary and in law enforcement, that we're seeing the kind of problems today, that we're seeing the kind of behaviors today? Three things that I'll highlight today. One is the appointment system that was laid down for both the judiciary and law enforcement itself was actually had issues. Coming from years of autocratic rule, the emphasis I think of the reform process was very much on making it as independent as possible, which basically means reducing the role of the government on processes and making it, bringing in independent voices. That was the focus, which was good, but I think there was selective application of certain principles and standards, not a complete package. For instance, in the judicial appointments, there was a 2-year period that the Constitution laid down for the Judicial Service Commission, which was an independent body created for the first time, in Maldives for appointments of judges. But the rules, so the Constitution really laid down the principle and the broad contours of what the JSC is supposed to do. Now thereafter, the rules that the JSC will follow, how open the process would be, what would be the criteria against which judges should be evaluated. None of that was debated as rigorously as it needs to be in any transitional democracy. And similarly, you see in law enforcement also on policing. Now, policing itself, is fairly new. A civilian police institution is fairly new in Maldives because till 2004 it was part of the defense forces. So it's only in 2004 that you see, it being separated, as well as an effort being made to expand policing in the country. Now, the 2008 Constitution, the process that it laid down for appointment of the police commissioner, which is a very crucial aspect of democratic reforms, was very, very basic, which is it left the power basically with the president to appoint and dismiss the commissioner. Again, the Police Act, which is supposed to flesh out some of these principles, has not focused on that and has left it at that. So I think that was one area which should have got more attention at that point of time, to make it more robust, to make it more transparent, so that public can also see and understand the nature of reforms that is happening, because all of this is very new for a large section of the population. As Mr. Ibrahim was mentioning, there were people who were coming back with these ideas, but then there are a large section of people for whom these ideas were very new. So one had to take them on board to build sort of a national consensus on it, which was missing essentially. So that's one, sort of main issues with the appointment system, I think, that one can highlight now. The other is again the idea of external oversight, independent oversight. The Constitution lays down a number of independent commissions to oversee the functions of the government. The Parliament itself, was mandated to set up a parliamentary committee to oversee the security forces. In principle, very good, very important, but again, fleshing out some of these principles has not happened, and that's been an issue. You have a parliamentary committee that is overseeing security forces. You also have a police integrity commission that was set up to oversee the police, behavior and police action. Then you have the Human Rights Commission of Maldives. So you have, and then you have the Anti-Corruption Commission. So various commissions were set up, not enough attention on building a collaborative framework between these institutions. And fleshing out what, their specific mandates. Complaints are coming against the police, they're going to various institutions, and then there is not always a coordinated effort between the two. So that has been an issue, and that needs to, moving forward, I think that will be an area to focus on. And also to remember that, this is an idea of oversight bodies is something that even developed or established democracies struggle with. In terms of, there's tremendous resistance within the government, within bureaucracy to accept, involvement of independent and, external people. So one has to take that on board when we evaluate even the performance of these institutions. So that has to be, again, consensus. I'll come back to consensus building. There's a lot of space for national level dialogue. Not so much, a lot of problem with transition democracy is the role that international actors start playing. And again, that has its limitations. It has to be a national process. You have to go into the islands and build consensus. I mean, you've set up a local government system, but I don't know how functional the local councils really are or what the people's perception are. They might even miss the older system. So I mean, these are some of the things that could be focused, now with the current crisis in Mali. And finally, the third thing that I want to highlight is you set up an independent judiciary, but your criminal law reform process has yet not happened. It's been tremendously slow. We hear that the penal code is finally ready. It was accepted by the parliament and will be implemented now in July or in the next few months. But the other substantive laws, the Criminal Procedure, the Evidence Act, none of these major criminal laws have yet been brought in tune with the new constitution. So and it's been about 7-8 years now since the constitution. So one has to, when we're evaluating the performance of judiciary, this is huge area of weakness or a failure in a sense of the reform process, because you cannot expect either the police or the prosecution or the judiciary to really improve its methods without having basic criminal laws. So they end up relying obviously on the older laws, so which allow a lot of power and allow a lot of discretion. So there's that inconsistency which has to be addressed immediately. And there is emphasis on this within Maldives. There are actors who are actors both within the state as well as international community that is looking at it. But the pace has been a problem, and that needs to be looked at. And finally, just an emphasis on sir, you mentioned in promoting more people-to-people contact in the region. I think before that, I don't know enough about this, but as much as we've traveled, we do get a sense that there's a huge disconnect between Mali and the islands. So I think that has to be somewhere in the focus area, because and I think it's also reflected in the voting patterns, because Mali is more pro-MDP and the other islands are generally more pro-Gayoom. So I mean that has to be the focus when we're moving forward before we bring in people from the region. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
I will speak more of as a sort of someone who is tracking South Asia democratization process. And what are the trends, what are the patterns that's actually emerging? And I do it quite often for the Carnegie Endowment. They have a program called Rising Democracy Network. So I'll be looking largely from a very holistic, from a very broad perspective, and in which I'll of course cite some of the tensions and some of the patterns emerging in Maldives' experience. What we can call as democratic transition, and then see how it actually fits with the democratization theory, and how democratization been happening all around the world, and where does Maldives fit? A year back, in fact, Economist, this influential news magazine, made a focus about in its special issue on democracy. It's a very extensive survey. In fact, one should see it actually. Those of you who would have not found time. one of the chapters that devoted was about South Asia, and which claimed that it is probably most happening place in terms of democracy, and it made a kind of very poignant kind of focus that at last entire South Asia is actually now a democracy, and probably in 2015 the odd man out in South Asia will be probably Sri Lanka, because it has in mind with Rajapaksa, the way he was consolidating and driving Sri Lanka to authoritarianism and sort of thing. So it said, but if you today you look at actually it's not Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has actually gone back and it's now really probably consolidating its democratic way. It's Maldives. The odd man out is Maldives today. With a lot of concern, my friends have been saying this. So where do we actually fit Maldives in terms of democratization? And democratization, as one knows, it's not a sort of linear theory. That once you have election and democracy strengthens and it evolves in a sort of linear direction. It doesn't. It's a non-linear kind of. It can it takes shape, it collapses, and it again takes shape. It happens in a very very sort of back and forth and in very diverse way. So Maldives case is really, as a democracy student, it doesn't really surprises me. It's if you look at the South Asia kind of experience in democratization, it's pretty normal. To say very in a sort of there are concerns, there are issues, but it's pretty normal. Most of the countries, except for probably India, have gone through this sort of times. And today, what's happening in Maldives, I would say, is to extend what Huntington wrote actually in his third wave. It's the democracy wherever it happens, mostly through top-down approach, stays endures and strengthens its roots, and probably it lasts long. Then democracy that happens through bottom-up approach. And Maldives actually, I know that what Ambassador Sadhu said that inadvertently, Gayam, sort of sow the seeds of democracy by sending thousands of students to read outside and come back. But he never imagined that this would actually lead to democracy movement. But democracy happened in Maldives largely through bottom of it, through social movements with lot of mobilization, mass sort of consolidation of civil society and the demand, and Nasheed and some of those people played a very stellar role. They were imprisoned and they made a sort of lasting contribution. So, but problem is that wherever in most of the cases, with some probably exceptions, wherever the democracy happens through a sort of bottom-up approach, the likelihood of its collapse is very much. And there is always there is something called the remnant of dictatorship or authoritarianism always remains with the system. And in Maldives, exactly it has happened. The guy grudgingly allowed, and he lost the election and he allowed, but then he retained the control by other means. Most of the institutions were his own, and he had some connection or other. So in a sense, actually, this remnants of this dictatorship or authoritarianism will keep bothering this country for a long time, I think. And because institutions are very fragile, as Devani said. They are actually just baby democracy. Things are just picking up. 3 years odd time in which Nasheed cannot really actually strengthen those institutions and take deeper. So in a sense, Maldives is unfortunate that the country never got an opportunity to at least 5 or 10 years in which democracy, democratic institutions, and many of these things could have been taken deeper sort of roots. That didn't happen. So unfortunately, you have a situation in which some of those institutions, which in some way are linked with the earlier dictator, have actually created a situation in which you have a situation in which democracy is most likely to collapse. And but the major problem is it's I think still if you look at many of those with such a gloomy scenario of democracy. There are, I think, I see as a democracy student, a lot of actually positive things in Maldives. The first, the chances in even wherever democracy happens through grassroots movements, other things, is that it can quickly come back. If there are even collapse, it can quickly regain because the civil society is stronger and people are aware of their rights. And today, a lot of information are flowing, and this is the classic case that we can, still have a Skype with someone. So the regime's ability to control information and sabotage any sort of way is actually limited today. So that actually is a positive thing. And then second is, if you look at also within this sort of institutional, exchanges that happen between the election commission and judiciary. Okay, we can say that judiciary is actually probably politicized, and there's very little hope that the justice will prevail from the institution. But if you look at election commission, see, the problem with the Maldives is the electoral system. The manner in which Ambassador also raised this. That you have to have repeat election. Someone has to really win 50% plus. So that actually created a repeat kind of election. But election commission, if you see, even Nasid has also accepted that election commission did to the extent possible that a free and fair kind of elections. So there was no dispute, and that's the reason why he even accepted the election outcome. So in a sense, election commission is one institution which has stood and probably shows some sort of grit and determination that the independent institutions which are very critical for democracy, democratic growth, at least you can see some bright spot here. And then the second thing is, if you look at the press is also doing a very stellar job with all sort of problems and restrictions, also mass kind of arrest, and the press is also doing a good job. So this is also positive things. But if you look at overall, just last part on overall scenario, what are the prospects in terms of democracy remaining this thing? I think this is where it's a small country, very tiny country with 350,000 odd population, sort of a international community and including India, have a very, very sort of their tasks are very, very clearly defined, very limited also. You can actually use all sort of influence, even think of sanctions or even Commonwealth membership. Many things can be actually used, but I say with a caution that it has to be very, very cautiously how to move, because it's a tiny country. If you just put the pressure a little, it can easily descend into chaos and repressed. The regime can be more repressive. And unfortunately today you have a geopolitics in which China is openly sort of weighing that tiny country for its geopolitical needs. So situation might actually take a very, very nasty turn, and you have seen what happened in Ukraine. Thank you.
I'll be talking about two things. One regarding how constitution and democracy has operated in practice in the last couple of years, and second, what it implies for foreign policy of Maldives and how it has impacted India. As we all know that multi-party democracy was introduced with promulgation of a new constitution in 2008, and subsequent election that took place, which brought Nasid to power. However, there was a setback to this multi-party democracy when Nasid resigned in tumultuous circumstances on February 7, 2012, and Wahid Hassan Manik assumed power without violence, as Maldivian constitution says that in this kind of eventuality, vice president is supposed to take over. However, there was allegation by MDP that it was nothing but a coup d'etat, and MDP said that president was actually forced to resign by rogue elements of police and military and supporters of former President Gayoom. He said that law enforcement agencies say that if president does not resign, then there will be a bloodbath, so to political unrest. And two important reasons for this political unrest are economic crisis and Islamic radicals who are present in Maldives, a section. Now, talking of economic crisis, Maldives has witnessed the worst crisis of any country going through democratic transition. This has been said by IMF and World Bank. Nasid had inherited this crisis from former President Gayoom. Actually, I don't have time to go into detail like how Gayoom had created this crisis, because he had recruited large number of people before he demitted office, and he had started a lot of construction work for which he had not provided in budget, etc. So, country was almost on the verge of bankruptcy. There was rising prices of various commodity. Actually, when Nasid was in power, I had the opportunity to visit Maldives. Then I could see firsthand that there was severe dollar crunch, and the exchange rate was going up. Like people were getting less rupiah for actually they have to pay more rupiah for getting $1. Dollar becomes very important in Maldives because it's an import dependent nation, and people also go out to avail health services. However, in this situation, India was trying to help out Nasir, and but problem became bigger with time. Now, second, the role played by Islamic radicals in country and its politics. In 1970, two different set of ideas took root in Maldives. One, progressive. This was the time when Gayoom started tourism, and it was expanded as an industry. Then Maldivians also, some of the Maldivians also went to Western University, including President Nasir. Then these people came back to the country and brought with them progressive ideas. But the other ideologies also arrived in the island at the same time. Saudi Wahhabism and South Asian Deobandism took root in the country. Interestingly, this also came to the country through the same route of education and travel. Saudi Arabia financially supported the development of Wahhabi religious study. People started traveling to Pakistan for jihadist training. However, this is very interesting that Islamic extremism was under control when Gayoom was president, and same forces asserted under a democratic dispensation. I had the opportunity to talk to some of the ministers in MDP government at that time. They said that actually democracy has provided them a lot of freedom, so these people are coming out in open, and actually this will help us to deal with them better, because we will be able to identify who are these people, and then we can take a step. Nasir wanted to relax strict Islamic laws to promote tourism. However, this was thwarted by assertion of religious right and judiciary. Nasir also he was forced to roll back a plan of allowing more multinational companies from setting up resorts on unutilized islands. He was forced to briefly close all hotel, spas and health centers as fundamentalists were against it. Then radicals also demolished monuments constructed by Pakistan at Atrocity during the SARC summit. Then they were also opposed to Nasir's restoration of diplomatic relations with Israel, and there was also attempt to transform the school curriculum. One very interesting thing about this present of this politics of Islamic radicalism in Maldives is that they have been changing side very frequently. When Nasir was in power, Adalat was part of the government. When Yamin was in power, Adalat was part of the government. Only today his religious minister has resigned. Day before, yeah. So this is very interesting, dynamics of the Maldivian politics, that whosoever is in power, religious groups are with them. As we know that the crisis in Maldives was triggered by the arrest of Chief Criminal Judge Abdullah Muhammad. Judge had ordered the release of government critic and opposition leader Muhammad Jamil Ahmad. He accused Nasir's government of working against state religion Islam with the support of Christians and Jews. No doubt, judiciary in Maldives is in mess, and but the action taken by Nasir was not appreciated. Actually, the way he acted against the judge, it created suspicion in the minds of especially among the elite, that it was a drive against judiciary and was politically motivated. So, because of this unwise step, Nasir converted a political standoff with religious overtones into an impasse between his government and judiciary. This precipitated the crisis and ultimately led to his ouster. Then, as I discussed, Wahid came to power, and once again the presidential elections were held under pressure because there was continuous political turmoil in the country. And however, what we saw that government tried to prevent Nasir by implicating him in court case, but there was pressure from India and international community. Nasir famously took shelter in Indian embassy, and some kind of deal was agreed upon, and Nasir was allowed to take part into the elections. There are four main contenders in presidential polls: Nasheed, Wahid, and Qasim Ibrahim, and Yamin. Subsequent developments, however, indicated the weakness of democratic institutions in Maldives and their misuse for electoral benefits by influential candidates. Then what we see that these democratic institutions are not only weak, but there is also a clash taking place between these institutions. When actually multi-party democracy was installed in Maldives, it was realized that there is a need to build working institutions, modernize the political system, strengthen oversight mechanism, and overhaul the criminal justice system, including the writing of a new penal law. This could not happen, and instead what we saw was a disruptive partisan politics from May 2009. MDP lost control of parliament because Nasir, as it was pointed out, that he was too much of a democrat, and after becoming president, he broke alliance and went alone for the election, and as a result, he could not get enough numbers in parliament. And since the constitution of Maldives work in a very clear fashion that the power is divided between president and parliament, so for the smooth running of the government, you require control in both the places. Opposition sensed weakness, and they started street protests, etc., and that created unrest in the country. And things actually did not improve even under Wahid. A survey of Transparency International, it said that parliament, parties, and judiciary, the pillars of democracy, are the most corrupt institutions of Maldives. It poses a strong challenge before the democratic institutions in Maldives to establish their credibility. There has been international effort to strengthen election machinery. International community is aware of the weakness of Maldivian democratic institution. India has invested a great deal of political and economic capital in Maldives. It wants multi-party democracy to survive in the country. In 2008, India has donated electronic voting machine worth 15 million rupees. Maldivian election chief visited India for training. He saw election being conducted into the country, and United States, etc. They have all placed money to improve the system. However, during the elections which were conducted, what we saw that these institutions were used to further political and electoral interests, like judiciary, of which Judicial Commission, Qasim Ibrahim was part. So he manipulated judiciary at that time in his favor. Yeah, and so institutions worked at cross purposes, and because of that, the cause of democracy is suffered in the country. This attempt to manipulate institutions was once again seen during parliamentary elections. Judiciary once again played a hyperactive role. It sacked election commissioner for topic, and he was actually sentenced. It was criticized by international community. Maldivian government asked the international partners to respect Maldivian constitution. In the parliamentary poll, Progressive Coalition of Yamin, Qasim Ibrahim, and MDA, they secured 53 out of 85 seats. This manipulation of institution continues in present times. This is seen in charging of Nasir with terrorism, and in Rush trials, which has been discussed in great detail, and also in conviction of Nasir and other leaders, including Defense Minister. What is the future of, quickly in half a minute, what is the future of multi-party democracy in the Maldives? pressure on multi-party democracy is from three quarters, the remnant of Gayu Mera, those international players that want to enhance their presence in Indian Ocean, and Islamic extremists. However, a political scenario in Maldives has changed sooner than expected, and as we know that Qasim Ibrahim has left the coalition. So, but this has also, the way I see it, it appears that this change in equation has also, precipitated the present crisis. Because after the election, basically Nasheed was reconciled to the fact that he's lost the election for whatever reason, and despite it being controversial, but he was reconciled to the fact that he is going to sit in the opposition, he is going to restructure MDP, etc., etc. But the moment Qasim Ibrahim left a coalition, it reignited desire for power or to go for protest, etc. Foreign policy in the sense, Nasheed, when Nasheed was in power, he used to say that he is following India First policy. However, there were some doubts that he was also very close to West as well as China. But under subsequent regime, what we saw that Wahid was very close to China, and Abdullah Yamin once again is very close to China, and the most important thing is that for the first time, Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Maldives when Abdullah Yamin came to power, and there is a clear-cut, tilt in Maldivian politics towards China, and Maldives has decided to be one of the founder members of AIIB, and it has also decided to sign a free trade agreement. So to conclude, the present government may not be reflecting the true will of Maldivian people. Second, multi-party elections may not have been completely free and fair, but it's an important step in the strengthening of democracy. Yamin controls the parliament, but his majority has got significantly reduced. Dictatorship may not have re-emerged in the Maldives, but definitely forces loyal to Gaim have reasserted themselves. And impact of change of regime in Maldives is already seen in its foreign policy, greater space for China, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. No doubt India has fallen on the priority list of present Maldivian rulers, and India does not enjoy the same advantages. Thank you.